You're listening to the Spiritual Deep Dives podcast, and I'm Mariah Cruz. When the Watchers looked down and chose to unite with the daughters of men, were they trying to uplift the evolution of Earth, or did they spark one of the greatest spiritual falls in cosmic history? For thousands of years, there were ancient spiritual truths and mystical teachings passed down only to the highest initiates walking the path back to God. It hasn't been until recent times that this secret knowledge has been available to the masses. Our team spent over 40 years researching many diverse spiritual, religious, and scientific sources, recording the wisdom from the ascended saints and sages of East and West, tapping into the Akashic records, and calling on God's Holy Spirit to reveal the spiritual truths and science behind the unseen forces that govern our lives. In this podcast, we will explore these teachings from a unique perspective that you probably have never heard before, and show practical ways you can integrate them into your life to resolve deep-seated personal problems, accelerate your soul's evolution, and help solve the world's dilemmas. Let's dive deep again into our series on fallen angels, Nephilim, and aliens. A quick note before we begin. If you're joining us for the first time, because of the sequential nature of this series, we recommend listening to the previous episodes first. In the last episode, we talked about Genesis 6, the daughters of men and the Nephilim. We'll open this episode by continuing that discussion. At the time of Genesis, we had the daughters of men and the Nephilim inhabiting this planet. Then we pulled in the Watchers and Elohim. Genesis 6 has been debated, talked about, and misunderstood for a very, very long time. But finally, we have some clarity on the subject because of the Ascended Masters. We're going to reread Genesis 6 and explain what this actually means. The following is from the Jerusalem Bible. The Nephilim were on the earth at that time, and even afterwards, when the sons of the gods resorted to the daughters of men and had children by them. These are the heroes of days gone by, the famous men. First of all, when we were discussing Elohim in the last episode, we explained that this is a plural noun, and that the Elohim have a lot to do with the evolutions of a given planet, the overseeing, nurturing, and creation of man after the divine matrix of God. They are the builders of form. We wanted to clarify that these beings are not who we were referred to as B'nai Elohim, which is the Hebrew meaning of the sons of the gods mentioned in this passage. Now we have a situation where in Genesis there were the sons of the gods, and in the Book of Enoch we had the Watchers. It was recorded that they made union with the daughters of men. This union produced a race of giants who overran the earth to a certain degree, and even resorted to forms of cannibalism. So the question is, how could have giants been the result of this union? As we discussed before, there is tremendous power in a Watcher, and when their seed was united with the daughters of men, we got something inhuman. It's not the normal production of a physical body. Part of the reason for this is that at the atomic level, there is a reproduction of the divine monad, the higher mind or Christ's self, and the evolving soul. The divine monad holds tremendous power. At the very core of this atomic structure was the tremendous power of the divine being whose seed brought forth the incarnation. This is why their offspring was so powerful. Their development took on a physicality that was larger than life because it was trying to retain the spiritual essence, an energy of tremendous power. The Watchers were commissioned to oversee the spiritual evolutions of various planets. Like a vision, they would hold a matrix for the evolution to progress spiritually, so mankind wouldn't get caught in the energy veil, another term for evil. Even though there were fallen angels, their creations, and other things on the planet trying to thwart spiritual evolution, just by the power of their thought, the Watchers helped raise the evolution through mind and spirit, and they didn't necessarily need to come down into physical embodiment to do it. But they saw these other evolutions, such as the daughters of men, who were very beautiful and voluptuous. These daughters, however, were in fact a genetically engineered creation by the fallen angels. So the Watchers looked down and said, "We have to do something about this mess." There were genetically engineered mechanization man and the daughters of men mixed in with the regular root races on this planet. So we can see when reading the explanation from Mrs. Prophet why someone of the stature of a watcher could do what they did. So about 200 of them descended to the physical level of this creation and placed their seed with the daughters of men in an effort to raise that evolution. However, something went terribly wrong. The question is, why would the spiritual hierarchy give the watchers approval to mate with the daughters of men, who themselves were genetically engineered? The answer is, they never did. This is something that is misunderstood by many about how things happen in the heaven world. People think that God, up there, makes all the decisions and commands everything directly from a throne, but they don't understand the free will that exists in the heaven world. If a group of individuals, say the 200 watchers who we've been discussing, decide to do something like mate with an earthly creation, they can. It's an act of free will. But you can see where they went wrong. They didn't get the proper approval. They didn't go through the proper channels and didn't seek the dispensation from the cosmic councils to do what they did. And so the offspring of the watchers and the so-called daughters of men, who were what Genesis 6 called famous men, developed as giants who overran the earth. After the earth was replete with the offspring of the sons of the gods, the watchers, Genesis 6 states, Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that the thoughts in his heart fashioned nothing but wickedness all day long. Now here's another very important distinction that we want to point out. We were always taught in Bible school and church that the wickedness of men meant us. Apparently, according to some experts, we have been sinning so badly that God declared judgment on us, his own creation. But remember, in previous episodes, we referred to the word wicked as the adversary. The term wicked is actually never used for someone who has the divine spark, those who are the sons of God, the light bearers, the children of God, who simply fall into difficulty or karmic situations. We may go astray for many embodiments, but we are never called the wicked. This name is only reserved for the fallen ones. So these wicked ones became a whole other level of interference. It's clear there were giant beings interfering with the evolutions of the planet. This is the unfortunate legacy of the Watchers. This legacy, according to the Book of Enoch, included every species of iniquity, including war and all manner of perversity, so that the world was altered. If you listened to our other episodes, does this sound familiar? When you're altering and interfering with the normal course of evolution of a planet, that's a huge problem, and the karma for that is very, very severe, which is why Enoch pronounced their judgment. When we think about the phrase, every species of iniquity, all we have to do is look around at the earth today, in past decades and past centuries, and we can see that every kind of iniquity has existed on this planet, and now we know who's behind it. This is the exposé of the century. In some ways, it's good that we don't have those memories of what happened at the time of Atlantis, and before that on Lemuria. There's a certain grace when we embody, when a veil descends and protects us from some of these horrific memories. But the soul still remembers. When we talk about these things, you may have a soul memory of a time when these events actually took place, but for the most part, they are hidden from us. This series, however, is reacquainting you with an overview of what really happened so many years ago in our cosmic history. One thing we should realize is the Lords of Karma understand that when you embody on Earth, you are going to a planet that has all of these problems and dark history. So moving on, we wanted to mention there are other Gnostic texts that were banned and hidden for centuries, just like the Book of Enoch, in that they also expose the false creators and their false creations. Following are 3 texts which we won't discuss in detail, but they may be of interest if you want to pursue more teachings on this topic. They are the Secret Book of John. This was dictated to John by Jesus and written during the 1st century. John was a disciple of Jesus. This book talks about a divine being called Sophia, which means wisdom in Greek. Without her consort, she gave birth to and created by herself a being called Ildebaoth, which means child of chaos. This being went on to create archons, which is Greek for rulers. They formed a false hierarchy in addition to the ones we've already mentioned, including Lucifer, Satan, and the Watchers. By the grace of God, the archons have been judged. The story of Sophia and Ildebaoth is not allegory or fiction, it actually happened. The second text is the reality of the archons, which is sometimes called the reality of the rulers. This is another Gnostic text that was found at Nag Hammadi and is part of the Nag Hammadi library. And the third text is called On the Origin of the World. The world means the world begun by divine beings and was later overtaken by the archons or evil rulers. Again, if you want to investigate these texts further, the Nag Hammadi library is available online. So we can't really get away from these false creations or from those in high positions who went rogue for whatever reason. And as we mentioned before, no matter what belief system you adhere to, the threads of a fall and a false creation run through all the major religions. Okay, so that's what we have on the 200 watchers from the Book of Enoch. Now we're going to move on to the Nephilim again, but this time with a twist. What we've been doing up to now is using the word Nephilim in a generic sense, which is to mean the cast down ones or the cast out ones. But an author named Zecharia Sitchin, whose work we're going to discuss now, says that the Nephilim are a specific group of beings from a certain planet. Sitchin and a few others were able to decipher the Sumerian tablets, and what came forth from his research is astonishing. We want to let you know that the Ascended Masters have condoned parts of what Sitchin brought forward. We're not saying that every book he wrote contains accurate information. We're only going to focus on the parts of his research that were validated by the Ascended Master Morya, who brought this information to the attention of the messenger, Elizabeth Clare Prophet. When an Ascended Master does something like this, it's because it's now time for the evolutions of this planet to have that record come forward for divine understanding and transmutation. So, Sitchin's first book, The 12th Planet, came out around 1976. By and large, biblical scholars and historians have ignored or criticised his book, and they still criticise the work of Sitchin to this day. Because of this, you will only find his books in the science fiction section of a bookstore, which says a lot about the ferocity of the author's critics. However, they do admit there are very few people like Sitchin who could read the ancient Sumerian tablets. What's strange is that, according to Darwinists and evolutionists, humanity supposedly came out of the Stone Age, and then suddenly we have the Sumerian civilization, which was highly advanced with such things as agriculture and waterways, government and a judicial system. So the question is, how did we go from making stone tools to building cities and writing laws almost overnight? We can also say the same about ancient Egypt. It seems that only 2 weeks ago, figuratively speaking, they were in the Stone Age. Then suddenly, here they are building the Great Pyramids. As discussed in previous episodes, civilizations were developed by two types of beings. One group are the divine beings, the avatars, Elohim and archangels, who evolved civilization from higher spheres, such as Sanat Kumara, and the emissaries who came to save the planet from the caveman state they had devolved to. The other group, of course, are the various fallen ones, who came in their spacecraft and started civilizations composed of their own godless, soulless creations. Their motto was, "We'll do it our own way, we can do it better." The records show that advanced civilizations were started by both groups. So let's get into what the Ascended Masters wanted us to know from Sitchin and his book, The 12th Planet. First of all, he claims that the biblical account of the creation of man was actually the work of extraterrestrials from another planet called Nibiru. He said these extraterrestrials were the Nephilim, and that they came here in their spacecraft when Nibiru's orbit came close to Earth about 450,000 years ago. In Genesis 6, the word Nephilim was translated as giants, but Sitchin says that's incorrect. It should have been translated to those who fell down to Earth in rockets. This is a completely different interpretation that he derived from the Sumerian tablets. So according to Sitchin, there was a fallen evolution inhabiting the planet Nibiru. Nibiru has a 3,600-year revolution around our Sun, and its orbit brings it near Earth, so he is saying that's when its inhabitants travelled here. Essentially, Sitchin claims that the biblical account of the creation of man is taken directly from these Sumerian tablets, and that account describes how the Sumerian gods created man. So, who were these gods and how did they create man? According to Sitchin, they were advanced scientists from Nibiru who created man through genetic engineering. In his book, he went into great detail about how this was done. Sitchin did not make it up, and neither is this some wild science fiction fantasy. He read directly from the tablets, and so took them at face value. So we have the same situation again, where a planet, Nibiru in this case, likely had evolutions assigned to it for a very specific purpose, but because of free will, they went off on a scientific bent, omitting any fusion with spirituality from the God source. And, as what happened on other planets, there were also many fallen ones who were already on Nibiru. How do we know that? We only need to look at the story of Anu, who was the god of Nibiru. We're not going to delve into his story, but we know that Anu, his two sons Enlil and Enki, and all his followers were rebels against the spiritual hierarchy. They were all Nephilim. In other words, those who were cast down, and at one time, were all followers of Peshawalga, or Lucifer. However, Sitchin knows nothing about what the Ascended Masters revealed about this. He didn't deal with the concept of rebels, nor did he classify the Nephilim, including Anu, Enlil and Enki, as rebels. He just stated they were advanced scientists who came to Earth, created man by genetic engineering, and so that's how you and I were created. But this is where we depart from Sitchin's assertions. Based on what the Ascended Masters have told us by reading from the Akashic records, only a certain portion of humanity were created in the manner described by Sitchin. The rest were from a spiritual source whose bodies were created by the Elohim through divine approbation, and who were ensouled with a divine spark and endowed with the potential to become one with the divine monad through spiritual evolution and initiation. So Sitchin does not deal at all with the spiritual aspect of this story, because he was not aware of what the Ascended Masters said. He only knows the physical, material side of the story. So we're only going to take his findings from the point of view that yes, this did happen. But again, Sitchin doesn't have the whole story. The Ascended Masters, who revealed this information to us, gave us the whole story about the two evolutions, the spiritual evolutions of light and those who either lost their divine spark or were born without a soul. These rebels started out as light bearers, great angels, and then defected, choosing the dark side, which we illustrated in various ways throughout this series. In closing this episode, we just want to reiterate that Sitchin was reading from the Sumerian tablets. And once again, why would the Sumerians ever write that they themselves rebelled against God and the spiritual hierarchy? Why would they reveal that they were the ones cast down, that they lived on a fallen planet, with fallen gods who came to infiltrate Earth? Of course they didn't write that. Just like with the other texts we've studied in this series, we know that the fallen ones would never expose themselves. They want to appear as gods, with a lowercase g, and for all practical purposes, they do. In episode 16, we will continue with Sitchin's understanding, coupled with the Ascended Master's clarification of his research, and we'll see how the Nephilim interfered once again with the evolutions of Earth. In our next episode, we will explore some spiritual tools you can use to deal with the situations we have been discussing, and draw down the tremendous power from God into your world for the protection of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for listening to Spiritual Deep Dives. If you like this content, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We'll catch you in the next episode.